Okay, Simon is a little confused about the New Testament. He wants to know, in terms of believing and
Hello,
trusting in the New
Simon.
Testament, in terms of believing and trusting in the New Testament, he understands about affirming the Old Testament as divinely inspired because Jesus affirms the Old Testament as divinely inspired, and he understands the Gospels because the Gospels record Jesus. But why should he just blindly trust the New Testament after the Gospels?
Mm-hmm.
What is his trust on those documents based on, or what could they be based on? Do you think?
All right. Well, the thing is like the pattern you find throughout the Bible is that God acts, does something, but then see it would be for God if there wasn't a witness to it. So he has people bear witness to it, and that's what the writings are about. And they tell a story of how God's been dealing with Israel, right? So God acts, and then bears witness to it in writing. So that's been the pattern all along, and God's always left it up to the community of people to decide which of those books are divinely inspired and which aren't. And they're trusting the Holy Spirit and the consensus of the community. But for the Old Testament, it was the Jewish community. It canonized the books of the Old Testament. And there's a little bit of squabbling about certain books, but on the whole, there's agreement. And the same thing is true of the New Testament. You find that the community just accepts this. So when the church was forced to come up with an official canon, because this guy named Marcion, who was a second century preacher who didn't believe in the Old Testament and was anti-Semitic, he starts revising the canon. He got rid of the Old Testament and then cherry picked out of the New Testament all the things he wanted to be part of his canon. Well, in response to that, the church had to say, no, here's the official canon. And they weren't now creating the canon, they were just recognizing it. And one of their main criteria is, has this work been accepted as the work of God all along? Have the community of the faithful accepted this? And then they had criteria like, is this written by an apostle or an associate apostle? Is it consistent with other things we know, and so on and so on. And so ultimately, you have to say that the Bible is the church's book because God trusted the Bible or trusted the church to put this together. That doesn't mean it's infallible, because God's using people and people are fallible. And I would not lose sleep if the book of Jude, or if someone suggested that Second Peter maybe shouldn't be in there or whatever. Yeah, okay, fine. But if I'm going to make a claim like that, you see, I should have really, really, really good reasons for doing it, because I'm bucking the wisdom of the early church, including this book here, and they had a lot more to lose than I did, and their lives are being laid down the line. They don't want to die for a lie. So, and they're closer to the situations, so they're in a better position to judge than me. Isn't it a little bit arrogant for me to say, hey, you know what, you guys made a wrong choice there. I decided this was not in the Bible. I think that's just a little bit arrogant. You have Jesus anticipates that his disciples are going to be, he says, the world will believe on me through your word. And that implies that if this goes on for more than one generation, their words are going to have to be recorded. And there's no reason to restrict that, Jesus, pre-authentication of the New Testament, to restrict that just to the disciples he's talking to. He's talking to the class of his disciples. And so, yeah, I think we've got precedent for it in Jesus' teaching, as well as just in the whole pattern of biblical revelation, God using the community. The only other thing I'd say is, at least with regard to the Apostle Paul and the book of Hebrews for sure, but there's so much insight and wisdom in these books that I can't imagine them being not inspired. Like when Paul says that to the world the cross is foolishness and wisdom, but to us it is to the world the cross is foolishness and weakness, but to us it is the wisdom and power of God. He's saying that when God shows forth his omnipotent power, it looks like him getting crucified on the cross. That contradicts everything humans have said about God throughout history. I can't believe that a first century Orthodox Jew would on his own come up with this absolutely revelatory, just breathtakingly beautiful conception of God completely on his own. He tells us that he learned it from Jesus, who knocked him off his high horse, and I'm inclined to think he's telling the truth.
Yeah, I think there's something to that for sure. And Simon, I can empathize with this question because I had certain problems. I don't even remember what they were anymore, but I used to have some problems with some of the Apostle Paul's teachings, and I just preferred to just read the Gospels and what Jesus had to say. Um, and I kind of had the same thing. Like, why do I have to have the same faith in Paul's writings as I do in the Gospels? And some of those arguments that you gave were really persuasive for me, but also the fact that Paul's writings have been so profound that some people even say Christianity is Paul's religion. That if it wasn't for Paul, the faith might not have happened the way that it happened. Assuming that take God out of the equation, of course. I mean, God would make a way. But the point is that people have elevated the work of Paul as being central to the spread of Christianity that we've seen. And I came to a point where I'm like looking at the New Testament, and you got the Gospels into Acts, into Paul's writings pretty much. And I'm like, if I really believe that God became a human in Jesus so that he could fulfill this atonement mission, do I really think that he just didn't see the Apostle Paul coming? This
Yeah.
guy was going to appear on the scene and like cling on like a barnacle onto God's revelation? I mean, there's no way. There's no way that would happen. So, and the early church, is sort of like this quality assurance filter to make sure that there were no barnacles on here that shouldn't be there. And
That's a really good point. I think, yeah, at some point you gotta, yeah, I believe in free will and all that, but God, yeah, give God's providence a little bit of credit, and I assume he exerts a little bit of influence on what books get in and what books don't get in, and whatever. And so I can't think he'd let his whole thing. And he says, "My spirit will be with you. My spirit's going to guide you and lead you into all truth," and all that kind of stuff. So, humans under the influence of the Holy Spirit are not infallible, but on this one, I'm going to side with the community.